Hello and welcome to Warframe Unabridged. I'm your host Fen, and today we're going to dive into Tidal Surge and Undertow. But first, we're going to have a quick discussion about min-maxing, which is something that's plagued this game for a very long time, and it's a throwback to the days when you had to actually equip a mod card just to be able to make use of a power. Back then, people would min-max to the nth degree and would produce frames like Desecrate Only Necros, who had 9 Forma devoted to optimizing his ability to wank off corpses. And if you didn't happen to have this niche build that prohibited you from actually partaking in any fun, people would wind up slandering you and getting angry with you, and it just made no sense. When that feature was removed from the game and all you had to do was simply be the frame to have access to all 4 of its abilities, this did a great thing for every frame because you didn't have to worry about equipping those mods and you could use all 4 of them at the same time. You had a much more diverse kit, and yet we still have people that mod specifically for one power, throwing all of their other powers out the window so that they could focus purely on one. And this is a problem because this drastically reduces the utility of any frame. It's led to the mentality that has infected the entire community nearly, including some developers by some of the reworks, with the mindset that if a frame is versatile, that they have no use. If you stand that mentality on its side, you can see that they still just want a frame that is min-max, but to a particular purpose, even if it's not necessarily one power. Unfortunately, this mentality poisons the attitude of many players towards frames like Oberon, Zephyr, Hydroid, and surprisingly, still Necros for many, due to their capacity to perform the tasks of many archetypes simultaneously. It's a very all-or-nothing mentality, and honestly, it's not that great for the community. Now, this has also impacted the community in another way, because we have so many players that are just too busy focusing on one power that they only compare one power, and sometimes not even a full power, but an aspect of a power to one aspect of another power on another frame. And this is grossly irresponsible for how you're examining the frame. For instance, I used to hear a lot of people say that Ashe was a wannabe Loki simply because he has a smaller duration. Of course, the frames serve completely different purposes, even if they both have the ability to be untargeted and become invisible. And it dismisses the fact that it does have a good CC at the beginning of it when it forces a stagger on everybody within range. That's not to mention the rest of the kit that they're entirely dismissing. How does somebody with extremely high health and extremely high mobility, a superior teleport, the ability to do immense amounts of finisher damage, come across as somebody that's a wannabe Loki when their power kits are completely different? They share a single aspect. And of course, when you compare one single aspect of one single power of 2 different frames, one of them is going to come out on top, okay? And that's just the bottom line. Now, I could talk about this phenomenon ad nauseum, but to prevent beating a dead horse, I digress. But since that's the language everybody speaks, I'll go ahead and do one comparison using that level of mental gymnastics. So the first power we're going to be discussing is his second power, Tidal Surge. The power is a fine form of mobility, which is comparable to Rhino Charge, Tailwind, and Slash Dash. When we compare Tidal Surge, it is superior to all of them in terms of the striking range by almost 3 times, with the exception of Excalibur, but his striking range requires that he hit one enemy at a time, and often will not even hit everybody within the range of the power as a result. His speed is superior to Rhino's and Excalibur's because he has no maximum distance that he can travel in the 1 second duration, while Rhino Charge and Slash Dash end at 12 meters base. It is undeniable that Rhino Charge will deal more than 2 times the damage if to far fewer targets, while Slash Dash will deal 50 less damage than Tidal Surge and to far fewer potential targets. Tailwind is much more difficult to gauge, but if you are remaining higher up in the air like she's supposed to, you're not going to be hitting many people with this. Now, I'm sure some of you are probably ready to pull out your hair already at this point because I'm being as intellectually dishonest as many people are. For instance, I'm completely dismissing the Slash Dash adds combo multipliers. It's affected by Steel Charge and several other melee mods, and Rhino Charge can double and even quadruple its damage when chaining it together. And therein is my point, okay? The powers are similar. They share one thing. You move forward. Now just take a second to think about it next time you plan on saying that a frame sucks, and just recognize that it's not that they suck, it's that you have a preference, and that is okay. You can have a preference. Now in the video, I am running him specifically for speed runs because I'm using a speed power. I'm using a form of mobility. The first build that I'm using has maximized duration, and honestly, it's just a mistake to go that route. As you can see, I'm just running into things left and right, and it gets to be quite agonizing over time. When you're running tight corridors in maps like in Grineer Ships, it's not all that viable. In the outdoor Corpus maps, you can see that it gets you a lot further, and they have much wider openings, longer hallways. It's better suited for surging forward like this. Still, with all that high duration, you're going to wind up kissing the wall pretty frequently. So now we're going to move on to something that's a little more well-rounded. If you're going low duration, this power is not going to do much for you. You'll be moving forward really slowly because the duration is always 1 second, and removing duration will just make you not go as far. So in this build, we're removing narrow-minded and just adding something that'll give them a little bit more extra speed. We're also using fleeting expertise, which is going to really impact our duration, which will also reduce how far we're flying with one casting. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I definitely prefer to use Tidal impunity for any and all situations when it comes to Hydroid, with very few exceptions. But when you're running a speed mission, this is particularly useful. This will prevent enemies from hitting you with damage over time, or from knocking you down, or from weakening your own damage, or even magnetizing you. Immunity to status is very important, and the utility in this cannot be overstated. And God forbid you do wind up running into a wall and you're next to a heavy gunner that's about to plant you on your behind so that it could just execute you. Well, you're not going to have that problem if you're running with Tidal impunity. This is one mod that makes sure that you don't just stay on your feet, but also that you suffer no residual effects from any enemy encounter. The only major downside to this, however, using Tidal impunity, his loincloth winds up looking like an enormous, probably 25-inch long penis. And if that's wrong, I don't want to be right. As a final note about Tidal Surge, if you happen to have knocked an enemy down or ragdolled them with it, they are open to the same ground finishers that Tempest Barrage opens them up to, and they also have to get up, which means that they are temporarily unaware for about the time span of 3 bleed procs. To see the optimal use of that time while they're getting up, go ahead and follow the link in the description below to my video on Tempest Barrage. We're moving on to his third ability, Undertow now, and there isn't that much to say about the power itself. At maximum rank, it does an astonishing 25 finisher damage per second, which you can maximize up to around 75. And that's if you don't include situational mods like energy conversion. It does make you and your companion invincible for the duration, and you cannot suffer any damage over time applied to you. In addition, you can wait out other status effects and recharge your shield. On top of all of that, if you happen to have the augment equipped, Curative Undertow will not only heal you, but at an additional cost, it will heal any squad mates standing on top. Honestly, there's not much else to say about the power itself other than how it can synergize with some of the new mods that have been released. I haven't put an enormous amount of thought into various different builds with this, but considering all damage over time dealt will continue during the submersion in Undertow, it is possible to use a combination of Lasting Sting, Endless Affliction, and Relentless Combination to allow your melee combo counter to grow even while you are doing nothing but sitting there in a puddle. One weapon that does this exceptionally well is the Destreza. If you're going up against high-level content, you're likely not going to be able to get incredibly long combinations off normally, but with this feat, you can build up into the thousands within minutes while perfectly safe from the enemies that you are building the combo against. Not only does the Destreza, one final neat trick when using Undertow is the fact that when enemies are standing up as the power ends, any bleed damage will gain stealth multipliers for about 3 ticks. You can do this an unlimited number of times during the duration of the status, and you can add new bleed procs while they are getting vertical. Now let's change pace for a moment and take a look at a rework. Just because I believe that every frame is good doesn't necessarily mean that I think that they're all on the same level, or at least not in all of the same categories. Not every frame is going to have the same survivability necessary to make it 2 or 3 hours in the endgame, and not all frames are going to have the mobility they need, and not all frames are going to be able to necessarily handle a spy mission safely. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little hard to playtest him accurately because it's really difficult to find a squad that's willing to go that far with him. He's so hated. It's just sad how hated he is. I've gone in missions and I was getting all of the kills and I was annihilating when I was running Hydroid, and yet people were rage quitting, telling me F you for bringing Hydroid. Now, I can tell you he can also not last that long solo. He doesn't do kills per minute very well. His kills come in batches, more or less. He has to wear enemies down, but he does it in a way where he can wind up executing about like 15 to 20 enemies simultaneously as opposed to 1 or 2 every second. Unfortunately, that's not sufficient to last in a survival because you need a regular income of life support or you're just gonna die. Now, a solution to this, I believe, would be to make Undertow and Tidal Surge into an amalgam. If we were to combine the two powers into one like this, making it something like an exalted form, he could possibly have an additional power added to his kit. Now, I don't pretend to know what that power should be, but consider what the amalgam could look like. In God of War, Poseidon took the great aquatic form and make something similar to this that Hydroid could turn into to emulate both powers. He could use the crouch button to enter Undertow and become undetectable, swallowing up enemies, and maybe you could just click sprint to surge forward, or you could just navigate normally. Such a form would be able to support the immunity to status, and such a form would be able to heal allies as you wash over them. In addition, you could put an end to the frustration that people have when they're in a squad with Hydroid, and that is that the power makes it so that you can't hit enemies Hydroid has taken into the Undertow. This power could be made so that gunfire, both ally and enemy, would be absorbed into the water and deal damage to the enemies that have been swallowed up, kind of making it something like a mobile magnetize. It goes without saying that this would be an extremely expensive toggle power, but at this point, I think it's time for the developers to truly release the Kraken. And that's it for today, Tino. If you like what I do here, go ahead and hit that like button. If you want to see more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you think somebody could learn something, go ahead and hit that share button. Make sure to join me next time in our unabridged journey with Hydroid, but until then, this is Fen, signing off.